At my aunt's holiday dinner, my wife suddenly stood up and whispered, "Trust me, we need to leave." 5 minutes later, her hands wouldn't stop shaking as she said, "Something's wrong with the food." I contacted poison control. What the investigators discovered put 12 people in the hospital. The parking lot of St. Michael's Medical Center was lit up like a crime scene when we pulled in at 9:47 p.m. 3 ambulances sat idling near the emergency entrance, their lights painting the wet pavement in alternating red and white. My wife Rebecca was in the passenger seat gripping the door handle so hard her knuckles had gone white. She'd thrown up twice on the drive over, once into a plastic shopping bag I'd found under the seat, and once out the window on the highway. I kept asking her what was wrong, what she'd seen, why we'd fled my aunt's Thanksgiving dinner like the house was on fire. All she could say between dry heaves was that something was wrong with the food, that she'd seen something in the kitchen, that we needed to get to a hospital immediately. Her pupils were dilated. Sweat had soaked through her blouse despite the November cold. When I touched her forehead, her skin was burning. I'd been married to Rebecca for 3 years, together for 6 before that. I knew her tells, her quirks, her patterns. She didn't panic easily. She was a chemistry teacher at Lincoln High School, someone who approached problems methodically, who valued evidence over intuition. When she'd stood up from my Aunt Gloria's dining table and told me we needed to leave right now, her voice had carried a certainty that overrode every social instinct screaming at me to stay. We'd been in the middle of dessert. 22 family members crowded around 3 tables pushed together in Gloria's oversized dining room, passing plates of pumpkin pie and apple crumble, laughing at my uncle's terrible jokes, arguing good-naturedly about football scores. It was the same scene that had played out every Thanksgiving for the past 15 years since Gloria had moved into the big Victorian house on Maple Street and declared herself the official host of family holidays. Normal, comfortable, safe, or so I'd thought. Rebecca had grabbed my arm with enough force to leave marks and pulled me toward the coat closet. My cousin Danielle had called after us asking if everything was okay. Rebecca had smiled, waved, said she wasn't feeling well and needed some air. We'd made it to the front door before my Aunt Gloria intercepted us, concern etched across her face. She'd put a hand on Rebecca's shoulder and asked if she needed to lie down, if she wanted some ginger ale, if there was anything she could do. Rebecca had looked at my aunt for a long moment, something unreadable passing across her face, before saying no, thank you, we just needed to go home. Gloria had hugged us both and told us to drive safe. The entire exchange had taken less than 90 seconds. We were in the car before anyone could ask more questions. The first 5 minutes of the drive home had been silent except for Rebecca's ragged breathing. Then she'd told me to pull over. I'd barely gotten the car onto the shoulder before she'd opened the door and vomited. When she came up for air, her face was gray. That's when she'd said it. Something's wrong with the food. I need you to take me to the emergency room right now. Not urgent care. The ER. And you need to call poison control. I'd started to argue, to ask what she meant, to suggest maybe she just had a stomach bug. She'd cut me off. Listen to me. I saw something in Gloria's kitchen. The food at that dinner is contaminated. Everyone who ate is in danger. Call poison control and tell them there were 22 people at that dinner. Tell them we need toxicology reports. Do it now. The absolute conviction in her voice had silenced every objection. I dialed poison control while driving, one hand on the wheel, Rebecca moaning in the passenger seat. The poison control operator had been calm and methodical. She'd asked what Rebecca had eaten, when symptoms started, what specific foods she'd consumed. I'd relayed questions to Rebecca between her attempts not to vomit again. Turkey, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, stuffing, cranberry sauce, gravy, 2 glasses of wine, pumpkin pie. Symptoms started approximately 45 minutes after the meal ended. Nausea, sweating, dilated pupils, tremors, elevated heart rate. The operator had asked if there was any possibility of food poisoning from undercooked poultry. I'd said I didn't think so. Everyone had eaten the same food. Then Rebecca had grabbed my phone and spoken directly to the operator. This isn't food poisoning. This is deliberate contamination. You need to send emergency services to 2847 Maple Street immediately. There are 20 people still at that location who consumed contaminated food. The operator's tone had shifted. She'd asked Rebecca to stay on the line, asked what type of contamination she suspected, asked how she knew. Rebecca had said she couldn't explain right now, but they needed to send help. Then she'd hung up and told me to drive faster. Now we were at the hospital, and Rebecca was deteriorating rapidly. I'd helped her out of the car and toward the automatic doors when her legs had given out. I'd caught her before she hit the pavement, supporting her weight while yelling for help. 2 nurses in scrubs had appeared with a wheelchair, asking rapid-fire questions. How long has she been symptomatic? What did she ingest? Is she allergic to anything? Any history of seizures? I'd answered what I could while they wheeled her through the doors into a fluorescent-lit triage area. A doctor had appeared, young guy with dark circles under his eyes and a stethoscope around his neck. He'd introduced himself as Dr. Nathan Brennan, emergency medicine, 7 years out of residency. He'd taken one look at Rebecca's vitals on the monitor and started calling orders to nurses. Get me a toxicology panel, full metabolic, EKG, and set up for gastric lavage. Possible poisoning, unknown substance. Let's move. They'd whisked Rebecca behind a curtain while I stood useless in the waiting area, trying to process what was happening. My phone had started ringing. My mother. I'd answered and heard panic in her voice. "What's wrong with Rebecca? Gloria just called and said you left in a hurry. Is she okay?" I tried to explain without really knowing what to explain. "She's sick. We're at St. Michael's. They're running tests. Mom had asked if it was the flu, if Rebecca needed anything, if I wanted her to come to the hospital. I'd said I didn't know yet and would call her back. Then I'd hung up and dialed poison control again, asking for the operator I'd spoken to earlier. She'd confirmed that emergency services had been dispatched to the Maple Street address. EMS was on scene. Did I have any additional information about the suspected contamination? I'd said no. My wife hadn't explained. She'd just insisted everyone was in danger. The operator had told me to stay at the hospital and cooperate with medical staff. They'd be in touch. Dr. Brennan had emerged from behind the curtain 20 minutes later. His expression was grave. "Your wife is experiencing acute poisoning consistent with organophosphate exposure. We've started treatment with atropine and are monitoring her cardiac function. Her symptoms are serious, but we caught it early enough that I'm optimistic about her prognosis. I need you to tell me exactly what she was exposed to. Where was she today? What did she eat or drink? What did she come in contact with?" I'd gone through the entire day. We'd woken up at our apartment, had coffee and toast for breakfast, driven to Gloria's house around 2 p.m., spent 6 hours at the dinner party eating and socializing with family. Nothing unusual until Rebecca had insisted we leave. Brennan had asked about the food specifically. Who prepared it? Where did the ingredients come from? Were there any strange smells or tastes? I'd said Gloria had cooked everything herself like she did every year. The food had tasted normal to me. I'd eaten the same dishes Rebecca had and felt fine. If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. That's when Brennan's pager had gone off. He'd looked at it, his face going pale, and said, "Excuse me," before walking quickly toward the main ER entrance. I'd followed, ignoring a nurse who told me to wait in the designated area. Through the automatic doors, I'd seen the first ambulance pulling up, then another, and another. Paramedics were unloading patients on gurneys, calling out vitals, rushing people through the doors. I'd recognized the first patient, my cousin Danielle, the one who'd asked if we were okay when we'd left. She was convulsing, foam at the corners of her mouth, paramedics holding her down while they pushed the gurney. The second patient was my Uncle Richard, Gloria's husband. He was conscious but barely, his skin ashen, his breathing labored. The third was my mother. That's when my knees had buckled. A nurse had caught me, guided me to a chair, pushed my head between my knees. Breathe. Just breathe. You can't help them if you pass out. The ER had erupted into controlled chaos. Doctors and nurses swarming each incoming patient, voices overlapping with medical terminology I didn't understand. Atropine push. Intubate. Get me blood gases. Call the ICU. We're going to need beds. More ambulances arrived. I'd counted 8 patients in the first 30 minutes, all from the same address. All from my Aunt Gloria's Thanksgiving dinner. My phone had been ringing nonstop. Family members who hadn't been at the dinner calling for updates, friends who'd heard something was wrong, my boss asking if I was okay. I'd turned it off. I couldn't process any of it. Through the windows, I'd seen news vans pulling into the parking lot, reporters setting up cameras. Someone had tipped off the media. This wasn't just a medical emergency anymore. This was a story. Dr. Brennan had found me in the waiting room around midnight. He'd sat down heavily in the chair next to mine, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. "We have 12 patients from the Maple Street location, all showing symptoms consistent with organophosphate poisoning. Your wife's quick thinking in getting here early likely saved her life. She's stable now, sedated, and we're monitoring her closely. The others are in various states of distress. 3 are critical and have been moved to the ICU. The rest are serious, but responding to treatment. I need to know what happened at that dinner. What did your wife see that made her suspect poisoning?" I'd shaken my head. She wouldn't tell me. She just said something was wrong with the food, and we needed to leave. Brennan had leaned forward. "We've sent samples of your wife's blood and gastric contents to the toxicology lab. Initial results suggest exposure to a pesticide, likely something in the organophosphate family. These are extremely toxic substances. Commercial use requires special licensing. This wasn't accidental food contamination. Someone deliberately poisoned that meal." The word deliberately had hung in the air between us like a physical presence. I'd stared at Dr. Brennan, trying to make sense of what he'd just said. Someone deliberately poisoned my family's Thanksgiving dinner? Who would do that? Why? Brennan had said those were questions for law enforcement, who were already on their way. The hospital was required to report suspected poisoning cases to police. Given the number of victims and the apparent intentional nature of the contamination, this was now a criminal investigation. He'd told me to prepare myself. The next few hours were going to be difficult. I'd nodded numbly. Difficult felt like an inadequate word for what was unfolding. Detective Lisa Kowalski had arrived at 1:15 a.m., 14-year veteran of the city police force, accompanied by her partner, Detective James Wu. They'd found me in the waiting room and identified themselves with badges and somber expressions. Kowalski had pulled out a notebook and started asking questions. "Walk me through the entire day, starting from when you woke up. Don't leave anything out, even if it seems irrelevant." I'd gone through it all again, this time including every detail I could remember. The drive to Gloria's house, the guests who were already there when we arrived, the conversations, the football game on TV, the cooking smells from the kitchen. Who had access to the food? Kowalski had asked. Who was in the kitchen during preparation? I'd tried to remember. Gloria had done most of the cooking herself over the past 2 days. My mother and my Aunt Veronica had helped set the table and arrange serving dishes. Uncle Richard had carved the turkey. Several people had wandered in and out of the kitchen throughout the afternoon, getting drinks, offering to help, stealing tastes of food before dinner. Detective Wu had asked about Rebecca specifically. When did she leave the main group? Did she go into the kitchen alone? What time did she insist on leaving? I'd explained that Rebecca had gotten up from the table around 8:30 p.m., maybe 20 minutes after dessert was served. She'd told me she needed to use the bathroom. She'd been gone for maybe 10 minutes before returning and immediately insisting we leave. Wu had made notes. Did she say what she saw in the kitchen? Did she mention talking to anyone? I'd said no. She'd only said something was wrong with the food, and we needed to get to a hospital. Kowalski had exchanged a look with Wu. We need to interview your wife as soon as she's medically able. What she saw could be critical evidence. I'd said I understood but would need to check with her doctor first. They'd left to interview hospital staff and examine the other patients. I'd been allowed to see Rebecca briefly around 2 a.m. She'd been in a private room, IV lines running into both arms, monitors beeping softly. Her eyes had opened when I'd entered, and she'd reached for my hand weakly. I'd sat beside her bed and held her hand carefully, afraid of dislodging the IV. You saved everyone's lives, I'd said. The doctor said if we'd stayed and eaten more, if you hadn't gotten us out when you did, things would be much worse. She'd closed her eyes. How many people are here? I'd told her 12. Her face had crumpled. I didn't get everyone out. I tried to warn them, but I couldn't figure out how without causing panic. I thought if I just got you out and called for help, maybe we'd be in time. I'd squeezed her hand gently. You did everything right. You got us out. You called poison control. Everyone is getting treatment because of you. Rebecca had opened her eyes and looked at me with an intensity that made my chest tight. It was Gloria. I saw her in the kitchen putting something in the gravy. A bottle, small glass bottle with a white label. She was wearing gloves, the kind you use for cleaning. She poured the whole thing in and stirred it, then threw the bottle in the trash and covered it with paper towels. When she turned around and saw me standing there, she smiled and asked if I wanted to taste the gravy before she brought it out. Like nothing was wrong. Like she hadn't just poisoned it. I'd felt the room tilt. My Aunt Gloria? That's impossible. You must have seen something else, misunderstood what was happening. Rebecca had shaken her head firmly. I know what I saw. I'm a chemistry teacher. I recognize pesticide bottles. I recognize deliberate poisoning when I see it. Gloria contaminated that food intentionally, and when she saw that I'd witnessed it, she asked me to taste it. She wanted me to ingest it too. I'd stood up, suddenly unable to sit still. This didn't make sense. Gloria was family. She'd hosted Thanksgiving for 15 years. She'd sent care packages when Rebecca and I were in college. She'd thrown us an engagement party. Why would she poison her own family? Rebecca had said she didn't know, but what she'd seen was unmistakable. Gloria had added something toxic to the gravy, and everyone at that table had eaten it. The gravy had been passed around, poured over turkey and potatoes and stuffing. Nearly everyone had consumed it. That's why Rebecca had felt the first symptoms within an hour. The others would have followed as their bodies processed the poison. I'd asked if she'd told anyone else what she'd seen. She'd said no, only me and the poison control operator, and now the doctors. The police needed to know. I'd promised to tell them immediately. Detective Kowalski had listened to my account of Rebecca's statement with an expression that grew darker with each sentence. When I'd finished, she'd asked if Rebecca would be willing to give a formal statement. I'd said I thought so, but we'd need to check with her doctor. Kowalski had made a call, spoke in low tones to someone on the other end, then hung up and told me that officers were being dispatched to Gloria's house immediately. If the poison bottle was still in the trash, they needed to recover it before any evidence was destroyed. She'd also said that all the patients were being closely monitored, and the hospital had contacted the CDC given the unusual nature of the mass poisoning event. This was bigger than a local police matter now. Federal agencies were going to be involved. Around 3 a.m., Detective Wu had returned with an update. Officers had arrived at the Maple Street residence and found Gloria Whitmore on scene. She'd been cooperative initially, expressing shock and concern about the dinner guests who'd become ill. She'd allowed officers to search the kitchen, where they'd recovered the trash bag Rebecca had described. Inside, beneath layers of paper towels, they'd found a small glass bottle with a white label. The label read, Methomyl, a restricted-use pesticide requiring certification to purchase. The bottle was nearly empty. Officers had also recovered samples of the remaining gravy from serving dishes that hadn't been cleared. Everything had been bagged as evidence. Gloria had been asked to come to the station for questioning. She'd agreed without asking for a lawyer. That detail had struck me as odd. If you were innocent, wouldn't you be furious at the implication? Wouldn't you demand to know why you were being treated as a suspect? Dr. Brennan had provided an update on the patients around 4 a.m. The 3 critical patients had stabilized somewhat but remained in intensive care. The others, including Rebecca, were responding well to treatment and were expected to make full recoveries with time. The prognosis for the critical patients was uncertain. One of them was my mother. I'd been allowed to see her briefly. She'd been unconscious, intubated, machines breathing for her. A nurse had explained that her exposure had been severe, likely because she'd consumed a large portion of gravy. She'd always loved Gloria's gravy, I'd remembered. Would ask for extra. Would soak her mashed potatoes in it. That preference might have saved my life. I'd never been a big gravy person. I'd taken a small spoonful out of politeness. Rebecca had done the same. We'd gotten lucky. Others hadn't. The news coverage had escalated throughout the night. By dawn, every major network had reporters outside the hospital. The story had gone national. Mass poisoning at family Thanksgiving dinner, 12 hospitalized, police investigating. My phone had been bombarded with calls from journalists asking for interviews, offering money for exclusive statements. I'd blocked the numbers. This wasn't entertainment. These were real people fighting for their lives. My family, my friends, people I'd known my entire life, all poisoned at what should have been a safe, joyful gathering. The violation of trust felt almost as toxic as the poison itself. Gloria had been arrested at 6:43 a.m. and charged with 12 counts of attempted murder, 12 counts of assault with a deadly weapon, and multiple counts of reckless endangerment. Her bail had been set at $5 million, which she couldn't make. She'd been transferred to county jail pending trial. The police had held a press conference at 8 a.m., with Detective Kowalski standing behind a podium flanked by the police chief and a representative from the district attorney's office. Kowalski had outlined the basic facts: a deliberate poisoning at a private residence, 12 victims hospitalized, 1 suspect in custody, an ongoing investigation. She'd refused to name the suspect pending formal charging, but the media had already identified Gloria through property records and witness accounts. Her face was plastered across every news site by 9 a.m., the family matriarch who'd allegedly tried to kill her loved ones at Thanksgiving. I'd finally been allowed to take Rebecca home around 10 a.m., on the condition that she follow up with her primary care physician within 24 hours and return to the ER immediately if symptoms worsened. She'd been weak, shaky, but conscious and coherent. The drive home had been silent. We'd both been processing something too large to fit into words. Back at our apartment, I'd helped her into bed and sat beside her, neither of us sleeping, just existing in the quiet aftermath of trauma. Around noon, my father had called. He'd been out of town for work and had missed the dinner. His voice had broken when he'd asked about Mom. I'd told him she was in the ICU, stable but critical. He'd said he was catching the next flight home. I'd promised to meet him at the airport. Over the next few days, the investigation had expanded dramatically. FBI agents had joined the local police, treating the case as potential domestic terrorism given the mass casualty nature of the poisoning. They'd executed search warrants on Gloria's house, her car, her storage unit, her financial records, her computer, her phone. What they'd found had been disturbing. Gloria had purchased the methamyl pesticide 3 months earlier using a forged agricultural license. She'd bought it from a supply company in a neighboring state, claiming she needed it for a commercial farming operation. Records showed she'd paid cash, used a fake business name, and had the product shipped to a P.O. box registered under an alias. The premeditation was undeniable. She'd planned this poisoning months in advance, but the why remained elusive. Detectives had interviewed dozens of family members, friends, co-workers from Gloria's past jobs. Everyone described her the same way: generous, warm, dedicated to family, never angry, never violent. Her husband Richard, one of the poisoning victims currently in the ICU, had told investigators from his hospital bed that he'd never seen his wife act unstable or threatening. They'd been married for 38 years. If she'd harbored murderous intent toward her family, he'd seen no signs. Financial records showed no motive of inheritance or insurance fraud. Gloria and Richard were comfortable financially, owned their home outright, had adequate retirement savings. There was no secret gambling debt, no hidden affair, no terminal illness that might explain a desire to take others with her. The breakthrough had come from an unexpected source: Gloria's therapist. Dr. Patricia Nolan, licensed clinical psychologist with 19 years in practice, had contacted the police 5 days after the poisoning. She'd explained that while she was bound by patient confidentiality, there were exceptions when clients posed a danger to others. Gloria had been her patient for 8 months. During that time, Gloria had discussed increasingly paranoid delusions about her family. She'd believed that various family members were conspiring against her, trying to steal her property, planning to have her institutionalized. Dr. Nolan had tried to treat these delusions with therapy and had referred Gloria to a psychiatrist for medication. Gloria had refused medication, insisting she wasn't mentally ill, that her concerns were legitimate. In their final session, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, Gloria had expressed anger about the upcoming holiday. She'd said her family had taken advantage of her hospitality for too long, that they'd used her house and her labor without appreciation, that they'd betrayed her trust in unspecified ways. Dr. Nolan had asked if Gloria was planning to cancel the dinner. Gloria had said no, she'd give them what they deserved. At the time, Dr. Nolan had interpreted this as Gloria planning to confront family members about her feelings. In retrospect, the statement took on a sinister meaning. Doctor. Nolan had provided session notes to police, documenting Gloria's deteriorating mental state over months. The delusions had been getting worse, not better. She'd been spiraling toward a psychotic break. The psychiatric evaluation ordered by the court had confirmed Dr. Nolan's assessment. Gloria Whitmore was suffering from late-onset paranoid psychosis, likely triggered by some combination of genetic predisposition and environmental stressors. The evaluation found that she genuinely believed her family meant her harm and that poisoning them was an act of self-defense in her delusional framework. She'd been found incompetent to stand trial and had been committed to a state psychiatric facility for treatment. The legal system would hold her accountable once she was restored to competency, if that was even possible. For now, she was locked in a secure ward, medicated, monitored, removed from society. The victims had varied outcomes. 3 made full recoveries within 2 weeks, including Rebecca. 6 others recovered with lingering effects like nerve damage, chronic fatigue, and digestive issues that might persist for months or years. 3 remained in serious condition for weeks before slowly improving. My mother had spent 23 days in the ICU, suffered cardiac arrest twice, and had required dialysis for acute kidney injury. She'd survived, but the woman who came home from the hospital was different, quieter, more fragile. The poisoning had aged her a decade in a month. Uncle Richard had filed for divorce while still recovering in the hospital. He couldn't reconcile the woman he'd married with the person who'd tried to murder him and his family. The marriage was dissolved within 6 months. The family never recovered, not really. We couldn't. How do you sit around a table together again after one member tried to kill you all? How do you trust food prepared by relatives? How do you celebrate holidays without the weight of trauma crushing the joy out of every moment? We tried, that first Christmas. 8 of us gathered at my parents' house, a fraction of the usual crowd. The meal was catered because no one wanted to cook. We ate in near silence, everyone pushing food around their plates, checking for strange colors or smells, unable to relax. We gave up pretending halfway through dessert. My father had said maybe we needed more time. My mother had said maybe we needed to accept that some things couldn't be fixed. Rebecca had nightmares for months. She'd wake up gasping, describing dreams where she was back in Gloria's kitchen, watching poison being added to the food, unable to move or speak or warn anyone. Her therapist, Dr. Michael Rothstein, specialist in trauma recovery with 12 years of experience, had diagnosed her with PTSD. The nightmares eventually decreased with treatment, but the hypervigilance remained. Rebecca stopped eating at restaurants for 6 months. She'd lost trust in food she didn't prepare herself. Even now, 3 years later, she checks ingredients obsessively, researches food safety protocols, maintains control over what enters her body in ways that border on disordered eating. Dr. Rothstein says she's managing her trauma, not cured of it. Maybe that's the best we can hope for. I think about that Thanksgiving sometimes, how ordinary it seemed until it wasn't. How I'd sat at that table eating poisoned food, laughing at jokes, completely unaware that someone had tried to kill me. How close we'd come to joining the statistics of families destroyed by untreated mental illness and easy access to deadly substances. How Rebecca's sharp observation and quick action had saved lives, including mine. I'd married someone extraordinary, but I'd never fully appreciated the depth of her courage until that moment when she'd stood up from a family dinner and said, "Trust me, we need to leave." She'd trusted her instincts over social comfort. She'd trusted her training as a chemist over her desire to believe the best of people. She'd trusted that I would believe her even when what she was saying sounded insane. The legal aftermath dragged on for years. Civil suits filed by victims against Gloria's estate, though there wasn't much to recover. Criminal proceedings delayed indefinitely while she remained incompetent. Media attention that flared up periodically whenever there was an update. Documentary producers reaching out, asking to tell our story. We'd declined every request. This wasn't entertainment for us. This was the worst thing that had ever happened to our family, and we weren't interested in packaging it for public consumption. Some of the other victims had participated in interviews, shared their experiences. That was their choice. Ours was silence. Gloria remains institutionalized. I've been told she shows little improvement, that the delusions persist despite medication. She apparently still believes she was protecting herself from a conspiracy. In her mind, she's the victim. The cognitive dissonance required to maintain that narrative in the face of overwhelming evidence is profound, but psychosis doesn't operate on logic. It creates its own reality, impervious to facts. I don't visit her. I don't want to. Some family members have gone, trying to find closure or understanding. They've reported that Gloria doesn't acknowledge what she did. She talks about the family like we're the ones who wronged her. There's no remorse because in her fractured perception of reality, she has nothing to be remorseful for. The poison control operator who'd taken my initial call had reached out 6 months after the incident. She'd wanted to know how everyone was doing, said our case had stayed with her. She'd handled hundreds of poisoning calls in her career, but the deliberate nature of this one, the number of victims, the family context, all of it had affected her deeply. She'd thanked Rebecca for being so clear and insistent on the phone, despite being symptomatic herself. That clarity had allowed poison control to dispatch emergency services immediately, before the situation became exponentially worse. If Rebecca had downplayed her symptoms or been less certain about the contamination, the response might have been delayed. People might have died. Her decisiveness had saved lives. If this story keeps your interest, Please subscribe to get more stories like this. Dr. Brennan, the ER doctor who'd treated us that night, had also followed up. He'd said in his years of emergency medicine, he'd never seen anything quite like our case. The coordination required to treat 12 poisoning victims simultaneously, the challenge of identifying the specific toxin, the urgency of the situation, all of it had pushed his department to its limits. But everyone had survived. That outcome, he'd said, was due to multiple factors aligning correctly. Rebecca's early recognition and departure from the exposure site, the prompt medical intervention, the hospital's available resources, the skill of the treatment team. Take away any one of those factors, and the results could have been catastrophic. Medicine, like life, often came down to timing and luck. I'd asked him once if he'd ever treated Gloria, if she'd shown any indication of mental illness when she was brought in as a victim herself. Because she had been poisoned too, inadvertently, from eating the contaminated food she'd prepared. Brennan had said Gloria's symptoms had been mild because she'd eaten less than others, but yes, she'd been treated and released that same night. Nothing in her demeanor had suggested she was the perpetrator. She'd been cooperative, concerned about the other victims, asking about their conditions. She'd performed the role of worried family matriarch perfectly. Only later, when police had found the evidence and Rebecca had given her statement, had the truth emerged. Predators and perpetrators don't always look the part. Sometimes they look like someone's kind aunt. The conversation that haunts me most happened 3 months after the poisoning. Rebecca and I had been in couples therapy, trying to process the trauma together, when our therapist, Dr. Angela Torres, specialist in family systems trauma with 16 years of experience, had asked a question that stopped me cold. If you'd known Gloria was mentally ill, if you'd seen signs of psychosis developing, would you have done anything differently? Would the family have intervened? I'd wanted to say yes immediately. Of course we would have gotten her help. Of course we would have prevented this tragedy. But the honest answer was, I didn't know. Mental illness carries stigma. Families avoid confronting it. We make excuses, rationalize behavior, convince ourselves that everything is fine, because accepting that someone we love is seriously unwell is terrifying and complicated. Would we have recognized the signs? Maybe. Would we have acted on them decisively enough to prevent the poisoning? I couldn't say with certainty. That uncertainty had led me to advocacy work I never expected to do. I'd started volunteering with a mental health awareness organization, sharing our story in educational contexts, pushing for better access to psychiatric care, supporting legislation that made it easier to intervene when someone showed signs of dangerous psychosis. The work gave me purpose in the aftermath of meaningless violence. It let me channel rage and grief into something constructive. Rebecca had joined me in this work, speaking about the importance of trusting your instincts, recognizing red flags, acting quickly when you suspect danger. Together, we'd reached thousands of people through workshops, conferences, and community events. If even one person recognized signs of mental illness in a loved one and sought help because of our advocacy, then something good had come from our nightmare. The physical scars healed faster than the psychological ones. Rebecca's nerve damage resolved within a year. My mother's kidney function returned to near normal levels. The visible evidence of the poisoning faded, but the invisible damage persisted. Trust issues, anxiety around food and family gatherings, hypervigilance, nightmares, the feeling that safety is always provisional, that catastrophe can hide behind normalcy, that the people you love most can become the people who hurt you most. These psychological scars don't heal, they just become part of who you are. You learn to carry them. You build your life around them. You find ways to function despite them. Rebecca and I decided not to have children. It wasn't a decision we made immediately or lightly. We'd wanted kids before the poisoning. We'd talked about starting a family, about the kind of parents we'd be, about creating traditions and building a life that included children. But after Thanksgiving 2021, that vision felt impossible. How could we bring children into a world where family dinners could be death traps? How could we model healthy family relationships when our own extended family had fractured beyond repair? How could we promise any kind of safety when we'd learned how fragile safety actually was? We'd gone through months of therapy exploring these questions before accepting that our trauma had changed our trajectory. We were okay with that choice. Not everyone understood it, but it was ours to make. The last time I drove past Gloria's old house, it had been sold to new owners who'd renovated extensively. The Victorian facade had been repainted, the garden redesigned, the interior completely gutted and modernized according to real estate listings I'd seen. Nothing about it suggested the horror that had unfolded there. The new owners probably didn't know, or if they did, they'd decided they could live with the history. Houses don't hold evil. People do. Once Gloria was removed, the house was just a structure. Still, I couldn't imagine living there, cooking in that kitchen, hosting dinners in that dining room. The geography of trauma is inescapable for those who experienced it. 3 years out, I can talk about what happened without my hands shaking. I can eat meals prepared by others without panic. I can attend small family gatherings with people I trust completely. Progress. But I'll never be the person I was before that Thanksgiving. None of us will. Rebecca changed too, in ways both obvious and subtle. She's more assertive now, less concerned with social niceties when something feels wrong. She'll leave situations that make her uncomfortable without explanation or apology. She trusts herself completely, trusts her instincts over external pressure to conform or comply. That trust saved our lives once. It's saved us from smaller dangers since: bad business deals, toxic friendships, unsafe situations we would have endured previously out of politeness. Trauma taught her to value survival over likability. If there's a lesson in all this, it's that you should listen when someone you trust tells you something is wrong. Don't dismiss concerns because they seem irrational or socially inconvenient. Don't prioritize comfort over safety. Don't assume that familiar people or familiar places are inherently safe. Evil isn't always obvious. Danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it looks like your aunt making gravy in her kitchen on Thanksgiving. Sometimes it smiles and asks if you'd like to taste something she's prepared. Sometimes it counts on your trust and your manners and your inability to imagine that someone you love could want you dead. Rebecca saw through all of that. She recognized poison where others saw hospitality. She acted decisively when action was uncomfortable and socially awkward. She trusted her training, her instincts, and her judgment, even when everyone around her would have thought she was overreacting if she'd voiced her concerns publicly. She got us out. She called for help. She saved 12 lives, including her own. That's the truth of that terrible Thanksgiving. One person's courage and quick thinking stood between a family dinner and a mass casualty event. I'm grateful for her every single day, and I'll never take a family holiday for granted again. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.